Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and today we're getting an update on Cosa Resources Corp. Cosa is traded on the TSXV under the ticker COSA and on the OTCQB under the ticker COSAF. And I'm joined today with Keith Bodnarchuk, President and CEO of Cosa Resources, and Andy Carmichael, Vice President of Exploration for Cosa Resources. So, gentlemen, great to have you on the show as always. And we're going to be diving into a project that we haven't given a lot of airtime yet to. When you did the joint venture agreement with Denison, you got a package of projects. There's really three in there. We've mostly focused on Murphy Lake North, and rightly so. That's where a lot of the drilling has been the last two campaigns. That's where you kick things off. But we're going to be focusing this time on Darby, and you put out some news to the market, kind of giving people a snapshot of where the targeting is going to be going on. But before we dive into the nitty gritty with Andy on this, Keith, I'll throw it over to you first. Why the Darby Project? Why was your team excited about it? What's the trend that it's on from a high level? What makes people jazzed to get onto this property and drill?
Yeah, certainly. So first off, it's great to be back on here with you, Shad. And yeah, we are excited by the Darby project. It was a big part of that transaction, what we did with Denison. Obviously Murphy Lake North, Packrat, and Darby, but Murphy Lake North and Darby were those two key projects. And it was a difficult one to get. It was a long negotiation, and it's really one that both sides, both Denison and us, saw the value in this project. And we're both really excited to, I know, go through these targets. I'm really excited to be able to finally drill this project next year. And so Darby is located right next to Cameco's Cigar Lake project. Obviously, Cigar Lake is the largest uranium mine in the world. It butts right up against their project. It hasn't been drilled in about 15 years. And it's one of those projects where if you go through the boxes of what you're looking for, it really hasn't seen modern drilling. It's seen, a decent amount of drilling that's kind of paints a picture about what's happening underneath the ground, but it really hasn't followed up a lot of the key targets that Andy's going to speak to. And like I said, it was a key project for us. And it's important just for us to kind of show the market that we do have, bench strength and depth strength in our targets. Murphy Lake North, is one that we'll talk about probably later, that it is, a lot of unfinished business there and it's still a key for us. But Darby has a lot of runway and it has fantastic targets that need to be drilled too.
Well, let's get into these targets. And Andy, I think it'd be nice if you also shared the background you had shared with us off mic that early on in your career, some of these targets were something you're already familiar with, and some of the team members at COSA are already familiar with, and some of them on the team actually helped drill it. So maybe give us the historical context here and what the team is going to be following up on.
Yeah, for sure, Chad. Yeah, it's an interesting story. The bulk of the work done on the project was done by a company called Pitchstone Exploration that our chairman of the board and one of our board of directors, Ted Truman and Steve Blower, they were really instrumental in doing that work with that company, Pitchstone. And almost all the drilling on the project was conducted in that company. And I was part of that group really early on in my career, and the first company I worked for in the Athabasca. And I think it's fair to say that the work that was done was good, but the opportunity to return to this project now with 15 more years experience and a couple of discoveries and delineations under our belt in the Athabasca within the group brings a bit more value to the project. And I think it's equally fair to say that we can see things a little differently now, and that maybe some targets existed on the project that we didn't recognize back then, but they're fairly obvious to us now. And those are some of the ones we'd like to speak to today. Another thing about Darby is it's kind of at the Goldilocks stage of exploration maturity. There's been good work done on it. Geophysics has defined those conductive trends, and then there's been enough drilling that has proven up the geology under those conductive trends, right? We know the fundamentals are there. There's great graphitic basement faulting that goes up into the sandstone. There's alteration in the sandstone, and there's some pretty excellent uranium numbers in the sandstone, which is really important based on our experience at Hurricane and many other deposits in the basin. But that drilling has been not as effective at testing the trends themselves, right? So it's proven up that, hey, the fundamental stuff's there and there's some really great things to direct our attention, but it's left most of the project wide open for further work. And it's great to be able to come back to this project, a bit surreal, really, with a different set of skills and experience, and be able to start and pick up where we left off, but with better tools to do so. Um, and so we went and looked at every drill hole on the project this summer, relogged, re-ranked, re-rated everything, put together a new geological picture, and a couple that stood out among others. But today we'll talk about the Delta and Charlie trends in the northeastern part of the project. They're up here. They have weak mineralization on them and a bunch of and some drill holes, but like I was saying, almost all these holes missed the target. Um, on the Charlie trend, here's one target that we presented in the news release. It's certainly not the only one, but it's one that's a real standout. The trend's 5 kilometers long. There's a handful of historical drill holes. Only one of those drill holes actually hit the optimal target. The rest of them are something like this. This is actually one of the better misses. Some of them are well off the mark. This hole looks like it missed the ideal target by about 50 meters, but on its way there, it intersected some good sandstone structure, good sandstone alteration, but most remarkably, something like 50 meters of really strong uranium geochemistry in the bottom of the sandstone. So it's not uncommon to get a shot of anomalous uranium right at the very, very bottom of the sandstone, but I mean like the bottom sample. This is like the bottom 50 to 60 meters has very strongly anomalous uranium at like greater than 4 ppm. Doesn't sound like a lot. Background is like 0.3 to 0.4 ppm. So, we're talking 10 times background over 50 meters. And then in the basement, it intersected graphitic faulting of graphitic metasediments over top of a granitic footwall unit. And that is just a really classical Athabasca environment for prospectivity. I mean, there's a number of deposits that have that this is a direct analog to. And, that's something that you can see over and over in drill holes, but to see it with, 50 plus meters of really strong geochemistry, that's got to get your attention. And it has gotten ours pretty quickly.
Andy,
On
just a
the,
quick question
Go
for you
ahead,
on
Chad,
that.
sort of.
While you got that image up, you talked about how they maybe missed it by, let's just say, 50 meters. This is par for the course with trying to vector in on where the actual discrete package of uranium is. So maybe just talk about the life that is a geologist in looking for these and how you can use a miss like that to become the next hit.
Yeah, so those near misses are great things. They're like the flashing neon sign saying follow up here. We did it once before at a little deposit called Hurricane. There was an historical drill hole called Cur 12. It overshot the ideal target by about 50 meters. It had a similar thing as this, a good structure alteration in the sandstone, a bunch of uranium through the bottom half of the sandstone. And we backed up the drill 50 meters. And our very first attempt, we discovered the Hurricane deposit with our first drill hole on the project, right? And this is a pretty good analog. It's a similar story. And so we see that. And of course, that's the formula that's worked in the past. We're, of course, going to go to that one quickly and it's going to key in. But it's not the only type of target we see on the project, but it's one of the strongest ones, right? Um, the deposits are small across strike, right? They're pretty skinny and long. And to miss one by 50 meters, you could have this highest grade uranium deposit in the world, and 50 meters to the south, you'll just get some anomalous geochemistry, and that's it.
About how many holes do you anticipate drilling when you drill this next year as some of the initial follow-ups? Because you got a lot of targets, but probably the limited by budget and holes. So talk to us about what the plan is.
Yeah, budget is going to be the limiting factor. I mean, there's no shortage of holes to drill on this project that have a really strong shot at leading to a discovery. I think we'd like to start out with about 8 to 10 holes. If we can get that done this year, that'd be a really strong start to this project, but by no means would it even scratch the surface of what we can do there.
Yeah, and I think on that, Chad, we have our joint venture meetings coming up with Denison in a few weeks here to finalize targets. But that's it's a privilege of mine to be in those meetings with Andy and then Chad Sorba from the Denison side, who's also a decorated geologist like Andy, and I can kind of get to listen to the brain power involved there with developing these targets. And so yeah, we'll be finalizing all that stuff here in the next few weeks. But both sides are equally excited to get out and start following up some of these fantastic results.
Well, Keith, that actually brings up an interesting point. Maybe we can touch on the brain trust between these two groups and the advantage of having Denison and their team involved. Do they have any thoughts in these technical? Oh, I'm sure they have some thoughts, but maybe talk about how they contribute in these technical meetings, not just here at Darby and the targeting, but also the targeting work you're doing over at Murphy Lake North.
Yeah, I mean they've been fantastic partners and a group to work with. Obviously, there's a familiarity between all of us, right? Andy and myself both worked with Chad previously and the entire Denison team. So there's a level of trust that's there and familiarity. But it's not just technically, right? It's community relations, it's everything like that. They offer a lot of advice, and having done all that themselves, it's a huge advantage for us to be able to lean on that expertise. And I think, like I said, that familiarity is huge. And I think it's a matter of just kind of the whole group's coming together there and coming up with what they think is the best targets, and people kind of looking at it through different lenses. But the reality is, we both have the same goal in mind of advancing this project and hopefully ultimately making a discovery.
Well, if we toggle back to the first map that we were on originally, just to give people a sense of all the different projects you have in the stable, the two big ones are Darby and Murphy Lake North. Of course, you have a lot of other projects, but I guess from a big picture, Keith, maybe give us some of the key catalysts that you have on tap, but also in the context of maybe uranium exploration becoming back in vogue again, because we have seen a stealth rally in the producers and even some of the larger developers since April off those tariff tantrum lows. The uranium spot price is coming back. There's a lot of tailwinds in the sector. The explorers have been ignored, but maybe is 2026 their year?
Yeah, I guess answering your second question first, I agree. It does feel like you saw that run up recently of explorers in precious metals, right? But that uranium is starting to feel like gold about 12 months ago, where everybody was wondering, if is the junior market dead? Are these explorers going to finally move and catch a bid? And as it always happens in these cycles, they eventually do catch a bid, and we're seeing that now in precious metals. And it feels like you mentioned, the Camecos and stuff have already ran up. The developers are really starting to run up the Denisons and next gens, and now you haven't seen the explorers move that much yet. They're starting to get more liquidity, but it seems like they're in a good position coming into 2026 to really start to re-rate and play catch up with the developers and the producers. As far as our plans, it's exciting now because our focus is, we do have that large land package, but our focus is just drill as much as we can. Vast majority of our budget in dollars is going towards drilling, and that will be Murphy Lake North first. We left the drill on site there. We have unfinished business there. And then Darby, right? We're going to be aggressively drilling these projects as much as we can. And, we're excited by the targets at both projects. And, I think Andy touched on that the team went to site. It was really him and our chairman, Steve Blower, that went and looked through all the core from Darby. Up until that point, it had been winter and everything was frozen, so it was more of a desktop review while we did this acquisition, and looking through photos and just trying to go by memory of remembering these holes during our time at Denison or Pitchstone prior to that. But this is a good exercise that the team has done in the past at ISO, where they just pull apart or old core, put the holes side by side, and Andy took Chad from Denison and myself through it after, and this is exciting targets at Darby. So it's important to note that we're ready to go with that pipeline of fantastic targets. And kind of going back to the ISO Energy story, I mean, Andy can discuss this better than me, but they were at a project called Geiger, drilling great targets. But the results weren't quite what they were looking for, and so with their last hole of the season, they flew the drill rig up into a project called the Rock East and found Hurricane. So I think it's always important that you have these equally valid targets ready to go, and Darby is showing signs of having similar type level of targets that those guys saw at ISO, and so we're extremely excited by that, and it's gonna be a great year. It's just drill. That's as much as we can.
Well, it is going to be exciting, and it's kind of that dual-pronged approach. You've got what could be twin flagships here, and they're both vying for attention, vying for drill meters, and both have compelling targets and unfinished work, and following up on historic work that looks like it has a lot of promise. So we'll definitely keep following along with it here at the KE Report. For those of you listening, if you want to follow along with the news, definitely click on the link below in the show notes. It takes you right over to the Cosa Resources website, straight to their news section, where you can sign up for updates that hit your email inbox, or just follow along with the news as the drilling starts and as the assays start coming back in. Gentlemen, always great to have you on the call, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Chad.
Thanks, Chad.